The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I want to go somewhere else, but I just got to say, I think from what you were talking about, how we're better off than we were 6 years ago, and I wish my colleagues had, talked about the person and when they had the opportunity to stop the person that drove the car into the ditch in the first place that caused us to have this debt and all this problem. So then when someone else comes along, they say, okay, I'm going to help you get out of this ditch that I didn't drive you in, but I'm going to get you out of the ditch now. And you start pushing them to get them out of the ditch. Now, you might not be going at 100 miles an hour yet. You're going maybe at 50. But now you're no longer in that ditch. You're out of the ditch, and you're moving in the right direction. But yet you want to blame the person that is getting you out of the ditch instead of the one that put you in the ditch in the first place. And that's where we are today. We were in a ditch in 2008, and now we're driving ourselves out of the ditch. That is where we are today. Let me go to where I really want to go to, Mr. Secretary. Dealing with asset management. And that's what I've been looking at, dealing with FSOC and the work around asset management in that industry. And I know they don't, assume all of the risk as banks, so we look at them differently. But I did see in one of the reports, however, and I'm concerned about herding. I think that was in an FSOC report, an OFR, et cetera, and we have, a lot of investments there. Should we be concerned about this process of herding?
Congressman, I think that obviously asset management has grown as a sector, and there's a lot of individual and institutional assets there. We've been looking carefully at this question for some time. The risks are not necessarily just firm specific. That's one of the reasons that we're looking across the industry at activities to ask, are there activities that are particularly risky? We have not reached a conclusion. I'm reluctant to give a view until we've reached a conclusion because, frankly, we've entered the process, as have regulators around the world, trying to understand and learn about a growing and somewhat new industry. We've identified that as a question. I can't prejudge what the answer is. What I can tell you is that it is important that we complete the process and that it be driven by facts and by analysis. And if there's action that needs to be taken, the appropriate regulatory body should do so. I think the notion that you cut these questions off because you think you might not like the answer or because you think you know the answer is exactly what got us into trouble in 2007 and 2008. We have to be willing to ask the questions, and even if the answers end up being hard, follow them to a logical, analytic conclusion. I think that's what FSOC is doing, and I look forward to that process being completed.
So let me, and I know on some in municipal levels and state levels where we have multi-billion-dollar pension plans that have tried to benefit from a greater diversification of asset managers by using more emerging and diverse asset managers, which are generally smaller asset managers, and some are minority and women who, have selective investment strategies. However, I'm finding that these small managers face real barriers that prevent them from gaining more market shares. Has the Treasury or FSOC looked into how we can get more diversification of managers in this industry?
Well, I don't know that FSOC has looked at it. As Treasury Secretary, I've looked at it. And I think that if you look at the performance of the smaller and minority-owned managers, there's not a huge difference. Some are successful, some are not. The same is true with the large managers. Some are successful, some are not. Some have good years, some have bad years. I think one of the problems is that there's a tendency to bulk things up because it's easier to deal with a few rather than a lot of managers. And we need to push back on that. We need to make it clear that the door has to be open to new participants in this space. And we've tried through a number of things we've done to have that be the approach, both in terms of how we've managed some things within Treasury and through other intergovernmental efforts we've had. I think we're making progress, but there's more progress that needs to be made.
Okay, because, as these asset managers get bigger and bigger, they play more and more of an important role in the sourcing capital to business that create jobs in various communities. And so, that's one of the reasons why with banks we had to go to the Community Reinvestment Act in the 70s. So don't you think we should be looking into some policies that can ensure that we have more inclusion in the asset management industry so that we can also make sure that they're investing or reinvesting in some of our other communities?
I think it's important for there to be broad participation and for the process to be open. I don't know that I would think you should have kind of mandatory targets, but I'd be happy to follow up with you. And it's a matter I have a great deal of interest in.
Time of the gentleman has expired.